We have Dr. Warren Farrell with us, and we have been anticipating this day for a long time, especially me. He's been published in many languages all over the world. He is a front runner for the men's movement and many other things. There's a huge list of achievements, things that Dr. Warren Farrell has been involved in and started up. So we're not going to delve into all of this. But today we're mainly going to be talking about his latest book, The Boy Crisis, because we have a sore lack of men, and there's a lack of space for men in today's societies, even though many say that women's positions are very vulnerable, which is also true. But in many ways, the women's movement have won and then some over the last many years. And Dr. Warren Farrell was actually involved in the very beginning of the women's movement. Well, not back in the suffragette times, but back in the early days of the women's movement. So can you tell us a little bit about how you got started in that, and how that whole movement, like your involvement in that?
No, when I was teaching at Rutgers University in New Jersey, and I was teaching political science, which was what my doctorate was in, and the women's movement surfaced, and I was talking about it as a political movement, and I was really excited about it. And I was just doing my doctoral dissertation, and my students said, Warren, you just have a fire in your belly when you talk about the women's movement, how excited you are about it. And just for me, the opportunities, expanding opportunities for women, and women not having to marry men based on their feeling that this person is earning more money than that person, and therefore I have to be a prostitute myself to not the person I want, but to the source of income that I want, seemed to me the way to go, and still does on that level. But I started speaking about those issues, and I persuaded my doctoral dissertation committee to let me change my doctoral dissertation to the politics of the women's movement, and that led me to getting involved in, initially as a researcher, to attend the meetings of the National Organization for Women in New York City, and that led to my being asked to form a men's group, because NOW was considering kicking out men because they were interfering with women in the NOW meetings. And so they said, well, Warren, if you can form some consciousness raising groups, which is what we used to call the support groups of the day, back in the late 1960s and early 70s, then maybe if those groups work and they take the men away from the meetings, the consciousness raising group meetings with the women, then maybe we'll be able to keep men in there. Well, I did, and the groups worked really well. And so they asked me if I'd run for the board of directors of the National Organization for Women in New York City. And so I did, and that worked out really well, and I was reelected many times. And so then I did, so I was speaking around the world on women's issues. And then somewhere in the 1970s, I began to see, maybe 73, 74, I began to see that there was this large increase in divorces. And we had the initial data on the fact that the children of divorce who did not have a lot of father involvement were ones that were not doing very well, particularly the boys. And so I mentioned this to the board of NOW, thinking they would be very interested in this. And they looked at me like, well, Warren, we want, our members want women to be able to have the choice after a divorce as to whether to be the primary people with the children or the only parent with the children. And they want to be free. We want our members to be free to be able to marry a new man and to move away to, out of state or out of the region and with their children. And we don't want men to interfere with this. The children, we trust that the mothers will care the most for the children and know the children the best and will do what's in the best interest of the children. And I said, this is like saying that, male doctors know what's best in medicine, and we should just let all the decisions be to male doctors, and we shouldn't let women in. And when we do let women in, we should let the women need to kowtow to the decisions of the male doctors, because after all, they know the best. They've been there the longest. And they said, Warren, we thought you were on our side. And I said, am on our side. I always will support the right of women to do whatever they want to do. But when they do something like make a decision to have children, at that moment, they have made a free decision to do what's best for the children and to make their rights secondary to what's best for the children. And so what I'm finding here is that children are needing both parents to be fully involved after divorce, and it needs to be both biological parents. And so and that's not me saying that. That is what the research is saying, even though at that time I wasn't that super a strong believer in the family per se, or the intact family. And I was very much in favor of freedom of choice for people to do whatever they wanted to do. But I found that that was that this was a reality that I had to face. Well, I soon, so they said, well, you said, Warren, that this is the beginning of your research, and why don't you just go ahead and do a little bit more research before you speak up about these issues? Well, I did, but the signal was really clear, which was that all your recommendations have come from the women's movement, and you're doing very well financially, based on it. And if you want to continue, and this was not said directly, but it was said very clearly indirectly. If you want to continue to get the recommendation of us for speaking around the world and being making all the newspapers and TV shows, why don't you just be careful about what you're saying? And so I decided that I really would be careful in the sense that I would do more research. But once I did more research, the more I researched into it, the more I found what I eventually reported in the Boy Crisis book, that the children who do best after divorce are ones that have a significant, are ones that have four things. One is about an equal amount of contact with father and mother, that have fathers and mothers that live within about 20 minutes drive time from each other, so that the children don't have to give up activities or friends in order to be with the other parent. Third, that the children are not able to detect any bad mouthing on the part of the mother toward the father or the father toward the mother. And the fourth, the most recent finding that I discussed in the Boy Crisis is the parents of the children having consistent couples communication counseling or relationship counseling, not just emergency-based counseling, because emergency-based counseling, both parents usually try to prove themselves right, and that you don't get a chance to see the underlying best intent of the other parent. But when you have consistent counseling, you can there's time for the counselor to be able to draw out from each parent, why is the father letting the child go to the playground and not protecting the child at the playground? Why does the mother feel that the child needs protection at that playground? Well, why does the mother feel that the child shouldn't climb the tree in the backyard? Why does the father feel that the child should climb the tree in the backyard? And what compromises can be made, or what I call checks and balance parenting, which I eventually discovered was that children that do best after divorces occur are ones that not only have those four must-dos, but that the fourth aspect of that, the communication, is what I call checks and balance parenting, where the mother and the father are talking about, what are the advantages of that child climbing the tree, and the father does the research. And what I found is that no research was adequate enough to explain to fathers why they do what they are intuitively likely to do, like let that child climb the tree. No research explained that the children that climb the tree actually increase their IQ, increase their ability to assess risks, what risks are too much, what risks aren't. But we also know that the child climbing the tree too high can fall, and that fall can create a concussion or even kill the child, and that the child needs protection, and that the negotiation of what balance between protection and risk between the mother and the father is what really leads to the children being able to have the best likely outcome in life. And so I began to research all these things between the differences between dad style parenting and mom style parenting, and what the values of each were. And I started to say in the Boy Crisis book to dads, to moms rather, or to dads rather, that that you don't expect the mom to hear you if you don't speak up. That moms can't hear what dads don't say. And on the other hand, The reason I was writing about this in the boy crisis is because no parenting magazines were writing about what dads contribute. No parenting magazines were explaining that the more children roughhouse with their dads, and in the way that dads tend to roughhouse, with boundaries enforced about what's going wrong during the roughhousing, the more the children develop empathy. And nobody, any father that said without data backing it up, I want to roughhouse with my kids so that they become more empathetic, that would seem very counterintuitive and a little bit like something's wrong with him.
Yeah.
But when you understand what happens for most dads, not all dads, when they do roughhousing and the way that dads tend to do it, how that leads to empathy and how that leads to the balance between assertiveness and aggressiveness, and how knowing that balance leads to children being able to develop better friendships, and leading those children who develop better friendships to be more involved and more motivated in school, and less depressed and less likely to withdraw into video games or video porn and so on. And so, but very few dads explain this to moms, and you can't read that in any parenting magazine anywhere that I was able to find. And so those became my motivations for putting forth some of these ideas in the Boy Crisis book.
Right. Because I just want to frame you in a way that you're not like a misogynist. Like many, there's so many men's rights activists, like, not that I know a whole lot, but they look up to you as a very strong figure for that they have modeled their work upon. So just to frame you as definitely not a misogynist, like you have been working for women's rights for so long, but seems to be there's something that has won too much, like our whole schooling system, like from when we put our children in nursing homes, or what do you call it, the kindergartens and schools, and all the way up through the education system. They're now mainly met by women, and the whole system is tailored to girls, whereas maybe earlier there was more room for boys with being boisterous and roughhousing and all that. And now we have all these boys that are being diagnosed with ADHD and whatever it's called. So there's not much room in the whole system, and we're trying to make the little boys into little girls. And that means that the male qualities, there are male qualities like making strong boundaries. We are losing that because it's not being developed.
Yes, absolutely. First of all, on the misogyny part, anybody that speaks out negatively about women and in any ways that women do not deserve has me as an opponent. So it's I'm extremely happily married. I teach couples communication workshops all over the world. I'm very much in favor of understanding that we're all in the same family boat, and when only one sex wins, both sexes lose.
Exactly.
And for that reason, I was a very strong supporter of the women's movement, particularly when the women's movement was focused predominantly on, in the Helen Reddy song, "I am woman, I am strong." Mm-hmm. However, in recent years, the women's movement has often been focused on, "I am woman, I've been wronged." And so we saw this in hashtag me too, and hashtag me too, I think, was a very positive and important thing to happen. However, what was disastrous is that hashtag me too remained a monologue. Hashtag me too needs to be a dialogue. Yeah. For each woman that feels offended or hurt by a man, there is a man that has felt rejected and maybe had his reputation ruined, or had his children taken from him after divorce, or had an experience of paternity fraud or something along those lines. And all those stories need to be told. And we all need to hear from each other about how those stories have hurt us and given us pain. And Katrina, before we were on the show, before we started the recording, you were saying how when you first met, is your husband's name Moiner?
Yeah.
Close enough.
No, tell me the truth.
Mjølner.
Sorry.
It's
Yeah.
really difficult. It's a
Yes,
very difficult.
sorry. We Americans don't have many examples of that name.
No,
Actually, zero
I'm the
examples.
only one in the whole world.
Yeah, that's right. You wanted to be unique, and now you got it. So let's see, Katrina, share with me how when you first met Moiner. Go ahead, tell me.
Yeah.
Don't be kind to me. Just tell me what is true. What is true?
When I first met Mjølner, yeah, he started telling me that men and women are different, and I was like, "Are you sure about that?" And he was like, "Yes, we are." And then he started telling me that the way you think is very different from what we are thinking, and how you're seeing the world is very different from how we're seeing the world. And then he started, like, I don't know, telling me or teaching me how he was thinking and how I could use that in our relationship.
Maybe not teaching, just explaining my way of thinking, not forcing it upon
Mansplaining.
you.
No, just explaining how he works, and that it just eased up in our relationship. Things became easier, and it was a relief. Well, we're still working on stuff, and you need to remind me a lot of times, but it was because I grew up and I was taught that, maybe not directly, but men are wrong, and we need to correct them as women, because we need to teach them how to be
Women.
decent and calm and right.
Yeah.
And that blew up in our face.
Yes.
I can see that now, because I continuously met men that were wrong. And I became a man myself.
And many women do.
Yeah.
They take on men qualities that it's absolutely not necessary.
Because I need to take care of myself and hold that space. And when I'm doing that, I'm making myself hard. And then I don't have the soft values, the soft feminine values. So maybe that's why I haven't been able to express myself in this world as the way I'm truly are. So maybe that's why, because I've been defending myself and holding that space and trying to be a man at the same time.
Yes. Can you, first of all, two things on this. One is that from my perspective and the work that I've been doing, I want every woman who feels like she wants to be more sort of masculine, and every man who feels like he wants to be more feminine, to be free to be able to do that. However, I don't want either sex to sort of assume that there isn't a difference between the genders. We start out from, most people start out from a different place, but as anyone who's been a parent will always tell you that they can see oftentimes from the moment a child is born that certain children have propensities. And my sister was always afraid when my parents left the room. I was just fine if my parents left the room. And to this day, she tends to worry more, to be more of a warrior. And those things don't bother me in the same way. And so we all have natural characteristics within us, and it's really important as parents that we not force our children to become what they're not. On the other hand, it's also important for our children to be given the strength to have discipline and enforce boundaries that help them to become what is keeping them out of balance. And one of the purposes of parenting is to sort of be able to see, what's natural in our children, but also what is in that, what is natural, what are they potentially missing? If my son is afraid to take risks, if my daughter is afraid to take risks, to what degree should I encourage them to be risk takers? and to what degree, if they're too much of a risk taker, and my son is feeling that the only way he can prove himself a real boy is to jump off a bridge into a shallow water, and people are calling a brook below, or a stream below that's shallow, and people are calling him chicken, and he feels he has to prove himself a hero by jumping off that bridge. Helping him understand why that pressure is not positive to look to respond to, why we love him without him having to do things that risk his life, and so on. So the value of both parents is sort of oftentimes to bring what is usually a difference in dad and mom style parenting both to the children, and so I was mentioning before, for example, about roughhousing, and moms oftentimes, when a dad is roughhousing, will say, "Oh my God, I just feel like I have one more child to monitor," and he's gonna, and I just intuitively feel that one of the children is going to get hurt, or more than one is going to get hurt sooner or later. And sure enough, she's only about 99.5% likely to be right. And sooner or later, one of the children do get hurt, and the mom thinks to herself, "Okay, I feel really guilty. I should have interfered sooner, but on the other hand, I didn't want to interfere. I didn't want to be controlling. The children seem to be having fun, so I wanted to give my husband the benefit of the doubt, and so I backed off. But now I feel badly because the kid, one of the kids got hurt." And I sort of knew and intuitively felt that would happen, and I was right. And so then the mother is usually astonished that what's the response of the dad? He goes ahead and says, "Okay, sweetie, you can't put your elbow in your brother and your sister's eye like that in order to win at the roughhousing." And the children go, okay, I won't do that again to my sister. And then they start roughhousing again, and the children go back and get so excited and caught up in the roughhousing. They have what psychologists call intelligence, or a lack of intelligence, under fire. And so they go back and they do some version of pushing their sister out of the way, or pushing their brother out of the way in order to win at the roughhousing. And so the mother is just astonished that the father hasn't learned his lesson, and he's letting the kids try again. But the reward comes from, and the fathers usually don't explain this to the mom, but the reward comes from the third time and the third time. So at the end of that time, when the children violate the rules that the father set, most fathers will go ahead and say some version of, "Okay, I gave you the warning not to do this, not to be too rough." And one of the children argues back, "I wasn't being too rough. I thought you said just don't poke my sister in the eye." And dad says, "I didn't do that this time." And dad says, "I think you know what I meant. No more roughhousing until tomorrow night." Yeah. And mom goes, "What? You're promising roughhousing tomorrow night?" And dad goes, and dad, again, often unconsciously and without explaining this to the mom, the tomorrow night comes. And now when dad says, "No more being too aggressive in order to win at the roughhousing," the children know that if they are too aggressive, they're going to lose roughhousing. Now they have an incentive to not be too aggressive. Mom would have said the exact same thing: "Don't be aggressive, don't use your elbows," but she would have warned them again and again, usually, and given them multiple warnings, and the children would have calculated that multiple warnings are not nearly so bad as having the fun of winning at roughhousing. And so the children would have ignored the mom and done that. And the mom eventually looks at the dad and says, "I'm kind of angry here. I've told the children exactly what dad has told the children, but the children ignore me, and they continue to ignore me. He speaks up once and they pay attention to him. Is it his deeper voice? What is that?" And there's sort of like almost a feeling of like being ignored. And usually the mother is the one that spends more time with the children and devotes and loves the children so deeply. And so so she's feeling like, what do I get as a reward for my greater involvement and deeper love and greater sensitivity? I get ignored. That doesn't feel like a really good reward, without often understanding that by the dad saying, "If you go ahead and do this again, there will be no more roughhousing." And then he enforces that by taking the roughhousing away until a future point in time, not taking it away forever, But because he's not angry, he can just do a small punishment, but enough of a punishment to not make it worthwhile for the kids to ignore him. And so those are the some examples of some of the lack of communication that is often done between fathers and mothers around raising children, that lead nobody to understand why children who have both of those parents do so much better in terms of understanding the difference between being assertive, aggressive, and having empathy, that is, seeing that they have to pay attention to their sister's need not to be poked in the face or pushed out of the way.
When children learn those enforced boundaries in that way, what does that mean down the road for their development into young adults and well, adults in our society, having learned this more strict boundary enforcement versus not having that boundary enforcement?
The single biggest word to sort of digest about what they learn is they learn postponed gratification. So if we take that back to the visuals we were just painting, the child is learning that I would like to push my sister out of the way. I would like to put my elbow in her face in order to win at the roughhousing. I don't want to do that to my sister inherently, but I like to do it for this purpose, or I need to do it for this purpose from the child's point of view in order to win at roughhousing, and that's all necessary. So the child is learning first empathy. My sister has feelings too, and I have no option but to pay attention to my sister's needs and feelings in order to be able to win, in order to be able to have future roughhousing. Second, I'd like to be able to get my sister or my brother out of the way, or the boyfriend from down the street out of the way, in order to win at the roughhousing. But if I'm really going to continue getting the pleasure of roughhousing, that is what I really want, I have to have postponed gratification and not do what I just have to do, I want to do immediately, which is win at the roughhousing, because then I'm going to lose at the roughhousing, that by losing the ability to roughhouse. So he's learning to postpone his gratification in order to get what he wants to have at the deepest level, the roughhousing. He needs to do, he needs to postpone the immediate little victories, like pushing somebody out of the way. And that leads, when he's playing in the schoolyard, instead of just pushing other people aside or getting his way, he realizes that the long-term, or that she realizes that the long-term benefits of friendships come when I consider other people's needs and perspectives and desires to win, or to if somebody slides into, we have a lot of baseball or football or rugby, that there's always, the purpose of games is to teach us to be able to sort of play together and consider each other as, and obey rules for the purpose of everybody being able to get along. The people who don't have postponed gratification usually just go right for what they want immediately, as opposed to realizing that if I treat the other person fairly, they're much more likely to remain a friend. And in the long run, I'll be much happier with friends than I will be with everybody sort of ignoring me. And then the postponed gratification also leads to them being able to focus on their homework, rather than getting a text and saying, oh, you want to play a new video game, and getting sidetracked from the homework by the invitation to play the video game, as opposed to saying, when I get finished with the homework, I'll text you back, and then we can play the video game, and giving and having postponed gratification. When I'm finished doing what I need to do, I'll do what I want to do, play that video game, having that built into their everyday psyche. That's what leads to the children doing better in school, and therefore being more admired by teachers, being more respected by their own parents. And for boys, girls almost are, for heterosexual girls and boys, the heterosexual girls are almost never interested in dating losers. They're interested in dating winners of one form or the other. And the boy that is losing, not getting good grades, not on the football team or the rugby team or whatever, is not the one that girls choose to go out with. And so therefore boys, end up withdrawing into video games or withdrawing into video porn, since porn is access to a variety of attractive women without fear of rejection at a price he can afford. And so he ends up getting addicted to porn, and the porn ends up addicting him to super exciting versions, increasingly excitable versions of being with a girl, until those excitable versions end up making him feel like the only way he can get turned on by a real life girl is by doing things like that are in the porn movie, and the girl feels like a porn object. And so she withdraws from a relationship with him, and then he feels disappointed, rejected, and goes back to the porn to ease himself. And the whole process continues until he becomes angry at girls for rejecting him, angry at people in his school for rejecting him, angry at teachers, angry at his parents. And that leads to drinking, to drugs, to overdosing, and so on.
So what I want to emphasize how important this topic is, how this whole thing is, the family structure with the father who knows how to be a man. Can you tell us something about the statistics so people can understand how important this is?
There are so many, like, just before you dive into that,
okay.
There's so many examples in the book backed up by statistics that's showing how important it is with a strong father figure. And you can measure it like financially in so many ways. So everybody should go read this book. It's an extremely important work. I cannot emphasize this enough.
Yeah, and I think there is a huge wave of people realizing this, because I've seen people post pictures of recent big magazines saying family, and there's just the mother and the kids, and then people are writing what's missing here, and most people can't see it.
Yes. Hey, thanks for watching. If you liked what you just saw, head on over to whoselifeisitsummit.com/podcast, where you can find full-length episodes as well as in audio format, and we do a lot of other cool stuff. You can hang out with us and other like-minded individuals who want to create a world that works for everyone, and we do that on our platform where we can chat, and we have Q&As and exclusive interviews as well. So there's so much to get over there. So come on over and play with us.